Hello, I am Dan. I am the greenhouse nursery manager here at Bartram's Garden, and I wanted to welcome you to our nursery, which most people don't get an opportunity to see. But if you are not familiar with Bartram's Garden, please check us out. We are part of the Philadelphia Park System, and we are a 40-acre site with many histories that you should come to explore, from community gardening to plant collection all through the country. And hopefully you can be a part of that history. So today I just wanted to give you a brief tour of our greenhouse, and then also we are going to do a container garden workshop for Love Your Park Week, which is now. Anyway, so hopefully that will give you some inspiration to grow some native plants at home, plants that invite pollinator insects, hummingbirds, other things that are part of our urban ecosystem here. Here are some of the native plants that we will have and are having for sale online. We are basically selling out of many things, so if you haven't checked out our plant sale, which supports the many free programs that we have for the community, check it out now before it's too late. So here is our greenhouse, which we grow many of our plants from seeds starting in January or February. And here is our cold frame, which is where we store all of our perennial plants over winter. So we make sure that this is covered actually with a white poly so that not too much sun penetrates it. And we just want to make sure that it stays a little bit insulated, just enough that the roots don't freeze too deeply. Hello. Now we're in the part where we're going to do a little workshop that's focused on planting native plants into containers. But first I wanted to break it down a little bit, because we're not just going to dive into picking plants that we want. We're going to talk a little bit about what types of containers to use, from size, material, and also the potting media before we get planting. So first I have a couple pots laid out, not the most exciting one, except this one. This is a beautiful one that one of our awesome horticulturists, Mandy, she uses up in the car garden. So these are all made up of different types of materials. Here, if you look close, this one, I mean, this is a nursery pot. This is what I have access to. Here down in the greenhouse, this is made of plastic. I would say it's about 12 to 14 inches deep, and the diameter would be about another foot, about a foot. Then we have this little guy, also plastic, only about 4 inches by maybe 3.5 to 4 inches deep, so pretty small. Then we have this material, and this material is a type of ceramic. I'm not sure exactly what type, but it is porous. So when thinking about materials, it's important to recognize that some materials are porous so that the moisture will leach out from that soil over time, especially on really hot days. But for plastic, the soil stays moist longer because it's staying inside that plastic. So when thinking about the location that you're putting your planter in, even if you don't have that much time to water your plant, make sure that you select something that is able to retain more moisture. So what you could do, if you do like the ceramic and using a more natural material, you could get a glazed ceramic. And a glazed ceramic, of course, will have to come indoors like all other ceramics during the winter time. You'd want to get it glazed. That helps hold some of the moisture in. Plastic, that is pretty good at holding the moisture in. It's easier material. It doesn't need to come inside during the winter time. So that's also a good consideration. So depending on what you want to use, just think about how heavy it's going to be if you do have to move it, and also how much time you have for watering. So then when it comes to thinking about the size, besides the material, the smaller something is, so this one will dry out a lot quicker than this large one because the soil has more mass in the larger one. So there's more moisture to lose, so it will take longer to evaporate over time. So for native plants, I would suggest using a larger pot because of that fact. And also because native plants at least the ones we're going to be talking about today, are perennials, so they come back every year and they'll establish a deeper root system. So the more space you give them, the longer they'll be able to stay in that pot without dividing them into smaller pieces so you can put them into other pots. So all very important considerations. As far as thinking about what size, this is a size that I would recommend. This is what I have on my porch. As far as size, I have a plastic one though. Right on my front porch, it gets part shade. And I think I maybe water it once every other week sometimes. So it stays moist fairly long, especially when it's in part shade. So this is about 1.5, 2 feet tall with about the same diameter. I think root depth. But I think you should be okay if you at least have like 8 to 12 inches of soil. That's a pretty good amount. So anyway, so right here I have my potting media. So if we look at this closer, it's not really soil. Soil is not created by humans, mixed together in different proportions by the hands of humans. Of course, you can make compost, which is an important element of soil, but this potting media is suitable for containers, including containers for your native plants. It has a mix of perlite, I think a little bit of vermiculite, and sphagnum, peat moss. So those are all elements that are in some of your potting medias, but they have actually more potting medias that you can use nowadays. Because sphagnum peat moss is a dwindling resource. So sometimes there are different potting medias, like Organic Mechanics uses rice hulls, which is really good for drainage. So it's really important to get the appropriate amount of drainage to the appropriate amount of water retention. So think about those big, large pore spaces in your soils where the water just penetrates through, but you also want to have little tiny micro pore spaces, and that's where the water stays when it filters through. So you want a good mix of sand, silt, and clay in most soils, but in potting media, you have a nice mix of the different mediums that you have in it. So we have perlite, vermiculite, peat moss, and some type of soil pH neutralizer in here because we don't want the pH to be too crazy. Most potting medias that you're going to get in any store, garden center, they already come pre-made with some type of nutrient charge. Our Pro Mix that we're using has no nutrient charge, but it does have an addition of micro-rhizine, which is always a debate, does it work or not. That's what we use. It's supposed to help your plants it doesn't add nutrients, it helps your plants absorb the nutrients, just like compost does. It's more about nutrient absorption and nutrient capacity as opposed to like, I'm adding nutrients to my soil, because neither are fertilizer. So make sure you get a well-draining potting media. Boom. Plants, the fun part. So whenever you're thinking about selecting plants, you want to realize that you could have different sun exposures from part sun, full sun, shade, but what does all that mean? So when we're talking about full sun generally is like 6 plus hours of direct sunlight, and that's your full sun plant that will thrive and flower more if you give it that sunlight. Then we have part sun, which goes a little bit less than 6 hours. Then we go to shade, and shade is usually a little like dappled shade if you're more like a woodland setting. You usually get just like sunlight that's usually not that direct. And just think about, when selecting plants, think about where that plant came from and what is its natural habitat. And just kind of mimic those situations from the soil to the sunlight. The first type of plant that I'm going to select are multiple plants together. So for containers, you always hear those 3 words if you've already taken a container class: thriller, filler, and spiller. So how do you do that with the perennial plants? You can do it, but the thriller would be the pop. It would be the flower, the big bloom that you get in spring or summertime. So here we have a penstemon, or we have a beautiful goldenrod. Neither of these are blooming yet because they bloom later in the season. So just take that into consideration. Nice pop of color, it's your flower. And these are two really beautiful plants because one, the penstemon, it's a flower that hummingbirds like. It's a little bit tubular. Think about flower structure. And then bees love, and other types of insects love this goldenrod. So they're both great pollinator plants. So that's the pop. That's our thriller. Then we got fillers. So these are the beautiful textural plants or the bold foliage. And what I selected here is actually a beautiful spirobolus. It has this nice soft texture that can be kind of added to our combination with larger bold leaves. But I also added another type of filler. It's kind of our bold foliage here, and this is called Lady's Mantle Alchemilla mollis. Also, it's kind of like this soft leaves. Yeah, I love it. So that's a nice bold foliage plant added to your soft textural plant in your pops. Then we got the spiller. That can be a little bit tricky with some of our native plants. So I cheated. I don't have a native plant here. This is a nice spiller plant that you can find in many garden centers. It's Lysomachia aurea, or moneywort, I believe is the common name. So it just trails over and adds this nice chartreuse color to our container. So here's an option when you're thinking about a sunny container garden. So you got thriller, filler, and spiller. Shade. Okay, I love shade. What did we just say? We had a thriller, filler, and spiller. Here, this is one of my faves that we're growing here in the nursery, and this is Phlox divaricata, also known as woodland phlox, and it is great pollinator attractor for different types of insects. And in mass, it has this beautiful soft scent that you can kind of smell as the breeze takes it away. It's like soft and sweet. So this is a spring bloomer, so you'll lose that pop in later in the season. But you have all these textures that you can work with. And the textures that I added, or the fillers, are this beautiful Osmunda, well, the cinnamon fern right here. So this is a beautiful textural plant that can be added. And then we have Pennsylvania sedge, and this is also our filler. So a nice textural addition, almost like we were creating this mini woodland setting for our container. And then for our spiller, we have this sedum ternatum. I know we think sedums, most of them like full sunlight, but our native sedum, sedum that is native to North America, this sedum ternatum loves the shade, and you can see right now it's like doing really well and it's blooming, so it has these beautiful white flowers in early spring. So that will trail right over your container, and all of these are native plants. Grasses are important because they provide kind of a refuge for some wildlife. Flowers are important because they provide food for insects and other types of living things. And of course, other plants are just important because they help suppress the weeds, hold in moisture, and also reduce erosion, all these other things. So many things that plants are important for. So, you see, here's my container. It's very large. It's nice and large. I would say it's about 12 inches deep. I already moistened the soil, or the potting media. Potting media, I'd like to moisten it before I put it in there just because it's easier to just make sure the moisture is consistently throughout the entire potting mix before you put it in. So I like to place the plants where I would like them to go before I start planting them. So we got the thriller in the back, our Phlox divaricata, or woodland phlox. We have the soft textural Pennsylvania sedge right here as our filler, and cinnamon fern as another filler right over here. And then we have the sedum ternatum that will trail right over the container. So I feel like the spacing is pretty okay. Hopefully over time things will start to spread. That is the goal. And I'm just going to start by gently squeezing the pot, flipping that pot over, taking it out. You don't want to damage too much of the root system, but we do want to loosen the root system, so I'm going to kind of use my fingers and just comb through some of the roots to loosen it up so those roots aren't strangling each other. And since the potting media is so loose, I'm just going to put that plant right in the ground in the same depth as where it was in the original pot itself. Just be nice and gentle. Plant that baby in. Then we're going to put in these fillers. Here's our Pennsylvania sedge. Now the cinnamon fern. I'm going to dig that hole again, loosen the root system. You can always shimmy things around a little bit until you get it to what looks best to you. Now for our trailer, our sedum ternatum, look at that root system. I'm so happy with this plant. It is a really easy plant to propagate. Basically, like many sedums, you like chop it into pieces and it will root from those pieces that you chopped. And then here are all the root systems that it's created. Or you could just take this right in half and chop it into 2 sections. So just make sure you plant it deep enough. Okay. Make sure you can get it to trail off that edge. Over time it will start to spread throughout your pot, so you'll have this nice mat of sedum ternatum. And boom! Now I probably would add another woodland phlox in here just to like fill things out and make it look all robust. But that is the gist of planting a container. So just like any other container, you want to consider the potting media, the type of container you're using, how much sun your container will get, and that will determine which plants you can grow, and then also how big your container is. Especially when you're growing native plants, you want the container to be larger so those roots can spread out a little bit more. So I would say at least 12 inches or more. That would be a good size. So over time, when your plants do start to get so large, which hopefully that's what will happen, you'll have to take some of those plants out and divide them, which would be a whole other workshop. But many of these are fairly easy to divide, especially the sedum ternatum and the carex, or Pennsylvania sedge, and the woodland phlox. You basically just separate the plant down to the base and use a really sharp, clean spade or shovel or pruners or hori-hori or whatever tool you use, and just slice that down the center. Make sure, and then plant it immediately into the soil and water it up, and then hopefully you'll have more plants to work off of in the future. So if you have any questions, hopefully that will spark some imagination for Love Your Park Week at home. And then in the future, hopefully you can do these same things at your park, but maybe in the ground, so we can get that urban ecosystem exploding with native plants and attract all these insects and wildlife into our city. So anyway, I'm Dan. I'm from Bartram's Garden. I'm the nursery manager here. Please come to Bartram's Garden anytime. We are part of the Philadelphia Park System, and it is open to the public for your enjoyment. And please stay safe and healthy during this crazy time that we are in during COVID. And thanks, and happy growing.